From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Good afternoon. Welcome, welcome. So thanks for being here. I'm Pam Jackson. I'm director for the Center for the Book here at the Library of Congress, and I'd like to welcome you to our symposium, Books Save Lives, a symposium on trauma and resilience in young people's literature. We're really grateful to have your presence here. We're excited for the conversation we've created to have, and we're very pleased to have the individuals with us that we have today on the panel and as moderator. Let me say a few words about the Library of Congress first, because we're proud to, and I'm always ready to say, that we are the nation's first cultural institution. And it's our mission to provide the American people with a rich, diverse, enduring source of knowledge, one that can be relied upon to stimulate intellectual and creative endeavors. And we like to focus on the fact that we encourage endeavoring, and that's not actually a conversation we have often. What does it mean to endeavor, to try, to aspire, to work, to make effort, to push the ball forward? Maybe not always succeeding, but at least endeavoring. And I like to emphasize that as part of what we talk about today, and it's certainly consistent with what today's conversation's about. At the Center for the Book, we're focused on making connections among and between our national and international networks and affiliates, and we do so to create collaborations and to cause others to do the same for the purpose of promoting reading and literacy and using the Library of Congress collections. That's an important part of what we like to have people know. There are 167 million things that are the collections of the Library of Congress. And one of the most people don't know that we have at least 30 some odd million items that are not books. We have treasures, as Dr. Carla Hayden likes to talk about. Manuscripts, letters, pictures, clothing, smoking pipes, playing cards, all kinds of things that are our nation's history, that are symbolic and significant pieces of our cultural heritage. And we have them for the purpose of not just having them, but to have people engage with them and in them and among them and use them as part of learning and advancing knowledge. And that's an important part of what we care about and want to make sure that you know about, that the Center for the Book's purpose is for. One of the things I can say is that we have our purpose and focus on promoting books and library and literacy and reading and poetry and literature, and we do so knowing that they're the best tools for sustaining and growing healthy, engaged societies. And in fulfilling our mission, we care about empowering people to be sensitive to and caring about the needs of others. Very consistent with our mission and our purpose is today's talk. One of the things that I've been promoting recently is my desire and commitment that we keep the humane in humanity. And looks like we might need a little more effort to do that these days. So, to today's event, we bring you 5 authors who will share stories about surviving chaos and trauma through fiction and real life. We wish to thank our funders for this program and our very special partners, the Center for the Book at the Virginia Foundation for the Humanities and the Maryland Center for the Book at Maryland Humanities. Andrea Lewis from Maryland Center is here today. Say hello, wave. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for your partnership. Thank you for your commitment. We value you as a friend and affiliate with the Center for the Book at the Library of Congress. And we also have that same for Jane at the Virginia Humanities Centers, who's unable to be with us today and sends her regrets. We're also we want to acknowledge, and we hope they'll be arriving soon. Olivia Smith is a media specialist from the Digital High School in Baltimore. They were commuting down here today. Have they arrived? Is that some of the? No, not yet? Okay. So we're going to have a packed house when they get here. There are about 40 students that are intended to join us today from Baltimore, Maryland, from that high school. And also West Potomac High School in Arlington, Virginia. Are you with us if you want to wave? I'm sorry, what did I say? West Potomac High School in Arlington. Oh, it's Alexandria, Virginia. Yes, hello. Welcome. Thanks for being with us today. And we want to remind you, those of you who are into media, our hashtag today is resilience in books. So feel free to tweet that out and pound that out, hashtag that out. How did it get to be hashtag in that pound? I don't know.
To keep from confusing Brits.
Oh, yeah, okay. Those Brits, huh? Okay. But anyway, before we get started, I do want to mention that now's a good time to check your mobile devices to make sure they're on silent so they won't be a distraction. We are videotaping this event, so all my silliness will be captured, but so too will your questions and answers. So as you participate in today's talk, which we would love to have you do, just know that we'll be recording you. And you can know that today's recording will be available online at loc.gov. And our collection of videos, and also read.gov is where you can find a wide variety of the author talks that the Center for the Book has hosted over the years. We encourage you to hang out in that space and see this talk later. We will send an email to our listserv when the video is posted to let you know about that. And we also will have this is another notification, a little housekeeping item before we get to the meat of our program. Book signing right after this program outside at the long tables as you came in. You saw the books, so they're available for purchase and signing after today's talk. So please, we encourage you to spend time with those books and spend your resources. There was a resource table out front when you signed in. We want to encourage you to stop by that table if you didn't already do so, just to have more information about some of material related to today's topic, including material from READ LLC, Welcoming Schools, GLSEN, Libraries Without Borders, Shout Mouse Press, the Association of Jewish Libraries, and the Children's Lit for Leaders blog. So some of that information is available. We want to make sure you know that today's topic is designed to have us be in a great conversation, but also be in action. You know, there's an opportunity for us to take away not just thoughts and feelings and experiences of others today, which is very valuable and why we have talks at all, but also to be in action about them. What could we be doing? What ought we be doing? What might we do next that we weren't necessarily planning to do an hour ago? So we encourage you to think from that lens as you listen to today's talk. So now let me get to the meat of the program, and my job is to do two things. First, to acknowledge again the folks who are with us and the panelists and the moderators, but also to give a particular shout out because some of them had to make heroic and Herculean efforts to get here, including I think 5 airports and 4 trains or something like that. So there was some experience of bad weather yesterday, and we just honor and appreciate you all for being here and the travels that you made to join us and that which you survived, including in one case, our moderator's case, a 22-hour travel day. So, and then I think, yeah, you can clap for that. And then I think we also had a couple panelists as well. Meg mentioned that, getting caught up in the Northeast, trying to get south. So thank you all. So let me introduce Joan Kaywell, who will be introducing each panelist, moderating the discussion and the question and answer period, which will take up the last about 20 minutes of our program today. She is a professor of English education at the University of South Florida, where she's won several teaching awards for her passion of assisting pre-service and practicing teachers in discovering ways to improve literacy. She donates her time extensively to the National Council of Teachers of English and its affiliate FCTE and a bunch of other acronyms, and I apologize for them, so I'm going to. So it's the President's Assembly on Literature for Adolescents is another organization that she's a part of. She's highly published. 14 textbooks to her credit, including most recently Between the Lines, actively engaging readers in the English classroom. And most recently also there was the establishment of the of the Joan F. Kaywell Literature Saves Lives Book Award to honor her, to honor you for your deep commitment to the profession and your fervent belief in young adult literature. And I would just say I've had the pleasure of meeting you this morning and your husband, and really admire and appreciate you, your leadership in the world, and your the strength that your voice provides for others. So thank you so much for being with us, and please join me on stage. Let's welcome Joan Kaywell.
Well, I am very happy to be here. And thank you very much to the Library of Congress folks, all of you. It is definitely an honor to be in this room with so much history, and to you all for being here because you're committed to the life-saving power of books. So to reiterate, I'm going to introduce the panel, and then I'm going to ask a bunch of questions, and about the last 20 minutes or so will be your chance to ask questions. So be thinking while we're talking about the questions that are pertinent to you. So I'm going to go left to right in introducing the panel. I think my pal here, Laurie Halse Anderson, probably needs no introduction. She's a New York Times bestselling author who's known for her work for tackling tough subjects with humor and sensitivity. Laurie was the proud recipient of the 2015 Freedom Award given by the National Council of Teachers of English and the 2011 Free Speech Defender Award given by the National Coalition Against Censorship and presented to her by her own hero, Judy Blume. Two of her books Speak and Chains, were National Book Award finalists, and The Impossible Knife of Memory won the Joan Kaywell Book Saves Lives Award in 2016. Ready for this? Her work has sold over 5 million copies. Please hold your applause to the end. Jarrett. Jarrett Krosoczka.
There you go.
He's also a New York Times bestselling author and an illustrator who creates books with humor, heart, and a deep respect for his young readers, qualities that have made his titles perennial favorites on the bookshelves of homes, libraries, and bookstores. He was first published at the age of 23, and since then he has more than 30 published books to his credit. His Punk Farm, Lunch Lady, and Platypus Police Squad series are all currently in the development for film. Krosoczka has delivered 2 TED Talks, which have collectively accrued more than 2 million views online. Hold your applause. Barry Lyga is another New York Times bestselling author for his murder mystery, I Hunt Killers. All in all, he has published 17 novels in various genres in his 11-year career. His latest novel, Bang! About the aftermath of an accidental shooting, has been called heartbreaking and tender and realistic. He lives and writes near New York City with his wife and his children, and he has a comic book collection that I think that even Jarrett would rival. So hold your applause. Thank you. Kekla Magoon. She's an author of 9 novels, including X, a novel that she co-wrote with Ilyasa Shabazz, the daughter of Malcolm X. How It Went Down in the Robin Hoodlum Adventure series is another one of her contributions to our world. She has received an NAACP let me just add that in there. The NAACP Image Award, 2 Coretta Scott King Honor Awards, and has been longlisted for the National Book Awards as well. Kekla holds an MFA in writing from Vermont College of the Fine Arts, where she now serves on faculty. Hold your applause, please. And then Meg Medina. Meg Medina is the author of 7 books, including Burn Baby Burn, that was longlisted for the National Book Award, and Yaki Delgado Wants to Kick Your Ass, a 2-time Pura Beaupré winner, and also a Joan F. Kaywell Book Save Lives Award winner in 2015. She was named one of CNN's 10 Visionary Women in America for her work to support girls, Latino youth, and diversity in children's literature. Wow, we're in for a treat, eh? So this is all about trauma and resilience and the life-saving power of books. And so we're going to talk for this first question about how can children's literature build resilience to trauma and chaos. And I'm going to start first with Laurie. I know that a reader found comfort and resilience in Fever 1793. Would you share that story with us today, please?
Yeah, this goes back to shortly after the book came out. I think this was early 2002. I was at a middle school in New Jersey, and I was giving a presentation on Fever 1793, which, for those of you who don't know, it is a historical novel about the yellow fever epidemic that almost destroyed Philadelphia during George Washington's first term in presidency there. And, so I'm talking about gross disease stuff and, all those sorts of things that middle school students love so much. And we get to the Q&A, and this young girl raises her hand and stands up, and she says, I don't really have a question, but I wanted to tell you that my father was in one of the towers when the planes hit them in the fall of 2001, and thankfully he got out. But it was really scary for a long time before we knew that he was safe, and it's still been scary ever since. And when I read your book, it was the first time I found a character who understood what I was feeling when I was so afraid. And boy, did that kid teach me a lot.
Thank you. Barry, can you give us examples of readers who've been helped by reading Boystoy? That's teacher sexual abuse.
Yeah, I think in terms of Boystoy, which is about a 12-year-old boy who has an affair with his teacher, and the ramifications of that, it's sort of obvious to look at situations of students who've gotten in touch with me and said, wow, something like that happened to me when I was that age, or something like that is happening to me now, and your book helped me sort of process the grief and the guilt and the complexity of it all. But I think for me, sort of the most eye-opening response I got to that book wasn't from somebody who actually had been abused. It was from a young woman who wrote to me shortly after the book came out and told me that her boyfriend had been abused by a family member in situations similar to what happened in Boystoy, and that the whole time they'd been together, she couldn't understand why he acted a certain way and why he did certain things. And then she read the book and she went, oh, now I get it. And she started talking to him, and he sort of opened up to her, and it helped a lot. And she said to me, because of this, when I grow up, I want to help people like this. And the coda on that is that a couple of years ago, through the magic of Facebook stalking, I thought, what the hell? And I looked her up, and sure enough, she's a therapist now. So, so that's a case where it didn't just help her. Now it's paying forward. She's helping other people.
Thank you. What about Adventures of Fanboy and Goth Girl with bullying in there? Yeah,
the bullying in Fanboy and Goth Girl, probably the most affecting email I ever got was the one that started, "Dear author, you saved my life." And I think we've probably all gotten some variation of that. This was a kid who, like the kid in my book, was sort of misunderstood, bullied, put upon, nobody understood him. And he wrote to me explaining in detail his suicide plan and how he was going to kill himself and the whole ideation of it, and that he was going to do it at midnight on this specific day that had significance to him. And then he started reading my book, and he looked up, and it was like 2 a.m, and he realized, oh, I guess I missed my chance, and didn't kill himself. So, thank God he was that anal retentive, I guess. But that was a nice email to get.
Thanks. I'm going to skip to Meg. Meg, you have Yaki Delgado wants to kick your ass, and that goes with bullying also. Do you have examples of how that book has helped kids?
I do, and it's not always a straight line, right? Because when we're talking about bullying, we're also talking about shame. And we're talking about issues that kids don't necessarily want to come to you and immediately admit what's happening. But it's been interesting to see. I had a school in Virginia that did a day-long and school-wide reading of Yaki Delgado to really unpack the ecosystem of bullying in the school. So not just kids bullying each other, but like principals bullying teachers, students bullying the student teacher, parents bullying the principal, that whole sort of vicious cycle that gets going. And they did it as a school-wide read and gave this school that was really struggling with violence sort of on its campus this thing that they could use safely to have difficult conversations with each other. So I've had that. And then I've had really unexpected things, like at the National Book Festival a couple of years ago, a mom came through with her daughters. She might be here. I see her often at these things. I signed the book for her daughter, and her daughter moved off. And the mother said to me, your talk made me think of a girl I knew in high school. I was terrible to her. and I'm going to try to find her and apologize. So sometimes it's not an immediate thing.
Thank you. Kekla, I literally finished a novel. Finished it on the plane. I did have a few hours.
22 hours.
And your book touches on societal bullying. Do you have examples of how society, how people have been helped by that book?
I think, I don't know if I have a specific single story to tell, but the experience I've had with that book, and sort of part of the impetus, for Ilyasa to want to tell this story about her father, is that we know a lot about Malcolm as an adult, right? We know about his ministry. We know that he was a civil rights activist. He was a humanitarian and a leader and a speaker, is famous for his speeches, and inspired a lot of people, did a lot of community organizing. He's certainly a misunderstood figure, right? People may have heard of Malcolm X, but wouldn't be able to give you much information about his life and his history. And so you can find out a lot about him. But writing a novel about him as a teenager is a sort of way of looking back at a time when he did not know that he was going to become this famous individual. He had no idea what his future held for him. And so one of the most inspiring and sort of powerful things about that story as a novel is you're reading alongside a character who has no idea what he's going to become. He feels hopeless. He feels like the world is against him, and the world is against him in a lot of respects, right? He goes through a lot of trauma in his life, from racism, in society, from classism, from the loss of his parents, from living in a city where during World War II, where he sort of tried to avoid going to war as a teenager. And so he went through all of these experiences thinking that he was worthless, thinking that he had no future, thinking that nobody cared about him, thinking he was unloved, thinking that he had no intelligence, even though he knew he was smart. He did well in school as a young child, but he lost sort of faith in himself for a period of time. And so this novel is about that period of time when he lost faith in himself. And so for a teen reader, for anyone really, the story reminds you that you don't know what's next, right? On those days when you feel hopeless, on those days when you feel like you're not putting a lot out into the world, it's just sort of you have to wake up the next day and think, I'm going to try to be a good person. I'm going to try to be somebody who does something for the world, because what could happen 5 years from now or 10 years from now, And so that's the message that hopefully is in the book. And when I go present to teenagers, it does seem like that has some resonance, looking at that book and seeing this character who we know is like, people wear his letter on a shirt, that we have hats that, you can quote his speeches. It's 50 years after he was killed, and people still want to talk about his life. And for them to recognize their own emotions in his 14-year-old self, their own hopelessness, their own feeling like the world is out to get them and they're not going to amount to anything, to say, hey, he felt the way I did when he was that age, and now look what he did. That's a really powerful experience.
And I felt that. So continuing on, though, talk about societal issues again, and how it went down with police brutality in society and all that. How has that book helped?
I think this actually echoes something that Meg said. It creates a safe space for people to talk about an issue that's going on in the world right now. So this is a novel about the controversial shooting of a black teen by a white man in his community. It's a multiple viewpoint novel with 18 different perspectives from teenagers and adults within the community where this loss happened. And for me, I was watching, after Trayvon Martin was killed in 2012, I was watching all the news coverage and thinking, we're not getting the real story here. We're getting a very surface story. We're talking about race in America, capital R, capital A. We're not talking about how it feels when the kid that was killed was your science lab partner, or the boy who gave you your first kiss, or somebody who sat next to you in class, or somebody who bullied you and you're pretty happy that they're not in school the next day. Those are complicated feelings. Mm-hmm. And so the experience of being able to talk about those issues that are very real to my readers, in a slightly removed setting, to talk about the fictional character of Tyrell, how he feels when he lost his best friend, to talk about your own feelings through the lens of fiction is a really powerful experience as well.
Thank you.
And I want to hop on one thing, because I think you're touching on it in seeing your community, seeing yourself there is really a powerful thing. So for Yaqui Delgado, what happens is that people will tell me, teachers especially will say that the Latino kids in their classroom suddenly are the experts on the language, on the food, on what that phrase meant, and they suddenly are in the position of power of saying, this is how this looks in our family, this is what it sounds like. And it may not seem like a big deal unless you're the person who never gets their, the way their family and their neighborhood looks and rolls spoken about. And suddenly it's there, and you have the expertise. I think that's really helpful to readers as well.
Jarrett, can you tell us how kids have been helped by the Lunch Lady series?
This past fall, I had a book signing for my books in general. There's this mother who just happened upon the book signing, and she picked up a copy of a Lunch Lady graphic novel. And as I'm signing it for her, she just began to weep. She began to cry. And I was taken aback. I wasn't sure what was happening. And she confided in me that she told me that the Lunch Lady books really saved my kid, because she had escaped a very abusive relationship from her kid's father. And when she set up a new life for she and her kid, the kid just retreated into themselves, and they weren't reading. They were slipping in their grades. They just weren't engaging in school. And however this happened, whoever handed that Lunch Lady book to this kid, she loved it, and she read all of the books in the series. And it's a powerful thing, because for me, I just wanted to draw a lunch lady fighting off evil robots with fish sticks that turned into nunchucks. Like that was my goal. Wow. So we'll never, and that's just the story that was shared with me. And these are just some of the stories that were shared with us. I can only begin to imagine what other stories are out there that we may never know.
It's true. And Laurie with Speak. Speak's been around for a long time. Raise your hand if you've read Speak. All right, so see there? Nice. Speak's going to be one of those books we can all predict 100 years from now will continue to be read. And you offer some stories of people who've been helped by Speak.
Oh, man.
I don't know where do you start, right?
Right. This book helped me. And this book has changed my life so profoundly. The readers of this book have changed my life so profoundly. Tens of thousands of communications over the years. The book's almost 20 years old. And from, an elderly woman in her 80s who wrote to me about being sexually assaulted at age 12 by some boys at school, and her parents married her off to the next traveling salesman who came through. And he finally died when she was in her 70s, and she was taking that time from her 70s till the end of her life to kind of start to go back and reflect on what her life had been. And, we write these books for kids and teens, but you guys are all pretty much old enough to know that when you go through something difficult in your childhood or adolescence, those scars, if not tended with love and care at the time they're formed, tend to linger and color your life for the rest of your life. So I think that even though we write in the field of youth literature, we're really talking about the most significant parts of our humanity. So Speak has been, I've heard from all kinds of folks, men and women, girls and boys, who have been, who are survivors of sexual assault, different kinds of violence, but also people who've held secrets, who've had bad things happen to them that they didn't have the language for or didn't have a friendly ear to talk to. And the book helped them see how our secrets can poison us. And when I hear from, especially a young person, that the book helped them find their courage to speak up, that's just the greatest blessing in my life.
And I'm going to continue on with The Impossible Knife of Memory, because you also shared that is very true or hits home with you. Yeah, can you share how that writing of that helped you?
Oh my gosh, yeah. The Impossible Knife of Memory is my most recent YA novel, and it's the story of so many of our teenagers today. A young girl whose dad is home from the war, Iraq and Afghanistan veteran, with physical and emotional wounds, untreated PTSD. And this book is for all those kids out there who have to parent their parents because their parents are kind of broken. And that's the hardest thing out there to learn. And it's a reflection of my experience with my own father. I wrote it as he was at the end of her life, so the writing of the book became a bit of a healing process for both he and I. But we've, especially with our older teens, they sadly get so good at putting the mask on. It's really easy to tell when 10-year-olds are struggling, but I think that the 17 and 18 and 22-year-olds need us all to open our hearts a little bit wider and give them a little bit of extra patience and love, because so many of them are carrying heavy burdens. And our books, which you so generously put in their hands, are often the key to unlock their silence and strengthen them, whether or not they talk to anybody about it. Just to know that you're not alone with your suffering is enough to let you get through another day sometimes.
Thank you. But the rest of you, how do you realistically portray a trauma that you may not have directly experienced yourselves?
Well, I start with questions for myself. And first, I'd like to say that when I'm writing about really difficult things, traumatic things, I'm also aware that I'm writing for young people. And it's not the same as writing for adults. When I'm writing for young people, the question, or the way that I'm thinking about it, is not how I dumb it down, or how I make it prettier, or how I make it less hurtful. That's not the answer. The real issue is, how do you communicate this? How do you represent this realistically, and at the same time be respectful to where they are developmentally, with the tools that they have at 15, at 16, at 17, at 12, when they're coming to the page? So it's this long sort of exercise in tact, in how I say something. And I have to be aware that this is maybe the first time they're coming to experience this with me. It may not be the reality of their family, but it is of their friend's family. So it's just this really delicate balance of being respectful of where teens are as they grow up, and staying honest. I think the biggest disservice we would do would be to be dishonest, to clean it up and make it less, reflect less what's actually happening.
I think one of the things we always have to remember is that even though as human beings we are incredibly good, almost addicted to organizing ourselves into groups, and so that we can define who isn't in the group, the fact of the matter is we're all individuals. We all experience the world only through ourselves. And so I think when you talk about portraying a trauma that you haven't experienced, there's a temptation sometimes to think, well, I haven't gone through this, so how can I talk about it? But anybody who's gone through a trauma is going to react to it differently, whether greatly or slightly, than somebody else who's gone through a trauma. So you look for sort of a core common humanity and you extrapolate from that. And what I've always done is I can only liken it to method acting in a way. In Bang, Sebastian was 4 years old and got a hold of a gun and shot and killed his baby sister. I have never done that, thank God. But I can sit down and think to myself, what would that feel like? What might that be like? How would I react if I had done that? And I'm a human being, so my reaction is going to be a human one, and hopefully will be recognizable to other people who read it. And I think that you can't aim for 100% fidelity, but you can aim for verisimilitude and hope that you're close enough that you hit the common notes that most other people will recognize.
Okay. All of your books have been censored some way. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that some teachers, librarians, people would be afraid to have them in their classroom. I looked up, and in Virginia, Medina's talk was canceled after the principal refused to allow her to reference Yaki Delgado wants to kick your ass, and wouldn't let her show her the cover. Barry Lyga's been censored all over the place, and also a lot of self-censorship with his. You're going to bring in I Hunt Killers, a kid who's been raised by a serial killer for a father. Laurie Halse Anderson's books have been challenged so many times that she's become the spokesperson for intellectual freedom around the country. She's a force to be reckoned with. Go to her website. Kekla, she's written about a book about it called Media Censorship. And Jarrett, Lunch Lady series, he's been censored because he's written comic books. And that's not real literature. And Barry, of course, could talk to about his comic book collection and how it's messed him up for life, right? So
It's so sad about him.
I know.
I'll never amount to anything.
So all of you, what do you tell teachers and librarians who are facing a censorship situation? And I'll have Laurie go last.
Thank goodness. Yeah, because she really is the queen bee on this one. She really has her stuff. I mean, here's what I say. Fear not, right? You're not alone, first of all. It's happened to other people. And I feel like, please have read the book so you know you can discuss why this book matters to your students and your school, why its literary merit is there. I think you should reach out certainly to the Office of Intellectual Freedom, to the NCAC, because they have all kinds of materials that you can use to shore up your relationship with your principal and your response. And certainly tell the author and alert the author and the publisher, because they can also send letters of support and so on. But mostly no, I mean, I feel so bad sometimes when a librarian will say, we've got this challenge to your book, because here's how I'm thinking. There's paperwork, there's phone calls, there's people with pitchforks, right, saying things like you're not a moral person, or what are you doing to my child? And this creates so much pain, really, for the librarian, for the parent, for the kid, And I feel for you, but I feel like it's so important to give kids books that really reflect what they're up against, that it's worth the fight. What do you think?
I was scheduled to be out at a bunch of schools that required air travel. And so this one librarian that was intending on hosting me brought a copy of Lunch Lady into her principal's office and said, we're going to get this guy to our school, and we need to make sure we get the funding. And the principal just took one look at it and said, I spent my childhood with my face in the pages of comics when I should have been reading real books. So I'm not going to have that man come to our school and promote comics. And all I could think of was her goal in life to be superintendent? But all those years with Archie and Jughead
Right.
just held her back. And now she was stuck as a lowly principal. And there's a lot to sort of analyze in that. You grew up reading comics, and now you are an elementary school administrator. That is a noble job. And so, I do speak to a lot of librarians who say there's a parent or there's a teacher, and this isn't a generational thing. This is younger, middle-aged, older educators, parents who say, only let my kid check out real books, no comics. For me, my mother was a drug addict. I didn't know my father. I didn't meet him until I was 17. I was raised by two very lovely grandparents who drank a lot. But I had Garfield in the newspaper every single day. And I would get to the comic book store and I would get Spider-Man and X-Men comics. And those were my lifelines. Those were my escape portals for what I was dealing with. So if you're telling your kid not to read comics, maybe you're taking the only life jacket they have in that moment.
You asked how we respond. I always am very careful to say to the librarian or the teacher or whomever has contacted me, look, I can be as loud or as quiet as you want me to be. I can raise a stink and try to rain hellfire down on your district, or I can say nothing and just wait for you to tell me what to do. Because I think our first reaction can sometimes be a very defensive one, like, you're banning my book, screw you. I'll show you. Do you know who I am?
I speak at the Library of Congress.
I speak at the Library of Congress, for God's sake. There's video.
April
Look at
7th.
LOC.gov.
1 p.m.
Right there.
RSVP at hashtag.
Hashtag resilience in literature. But I remember in one case, Boytoy was being challenged somewhere, and the teacher told me and then begged me not to say anything online and said, the principal is talking to the parents, and it's sort of this very delicate back channel, Cold War, diplomatic pouch type of thing, and, like a Jeffrey Archer novel. And if you make a big stink, then it could all go kerflooey, but I thought you should know. And I said, okay, and I didn't say anything. And a while later, I happened to be in that area, and a woman comes up to me at a signing and goes, by the way, we won. And I was like, and that's something, too. I mean, I've had Boytoy's been challenged, I Hunt Killers has been challenged, my graphic novel Manga Man was challenged for a sex scene where there is no nudity and nobody has sex, which really is stretching it. But anyway, that all happened, and they've never won, which I think speaks to the folks at the Office of Intellectual Freedom and National Campaign Against Censorship and people like Laurie who have been just freaking trailblazers in this. And thank you for that, for standing up so early and so often so that schlubs like me don't have to. And I think, when you're told about this, you give them the resources and you say, I'm here to do whatever you need. And I've always said that if the censors ever win, I'm going to buy 1 million copies of that book and send it to every library in a 40-mile radius.
Chris Crester does, by the way.
Yeah, no, that's where I got it from.
Kekla?
Well, I don't have, actually, interestingly, considering what I write about, don't have any direct examples or experience of my books being censored or challenged, which I find interesting because I write a lot about civil rights, I write a lot about violence, I write a lot about race relations and everything that you would think would be challenged. And I suspect that my books tend to be subject to a quieter form of censorship, with people not ordering them to begin with, or fearing the censorship conversation that might happen if they try to use it in their classroom. So which I think is of equal concern to the books that are being actively challenged, but much harder to quantify. And so that interests me as part of the conversation. And I mean, just to say, the book that I wrote, A Media Censorship, is part of a series of educational books for middle school about controversial issues. And so it's a book that presents the debate about media censorship and when do we ban books and why, and how do we choose what gets presented, and introducing teenagers to that conversation right at that age when they're first able to move beyond concrete thinking and recognize that people hold different opinions, and how do you navigate those issues. So because I think the debate itself is important, at every stage of publishing, at every stage of library usage, people are making decisions about what material is presented, what material is published, what gets into the collection, what doesn't get into the collection. When is that a personal choice? When is it censorship? When is it protecting? And when is it hurting? All of those things are shades at different places.
And those weird conversations where people decide who's the right audience for your book. That
Right.
happens for my books all the time, this
Yeah.
Latina girl will love this book, but nobody else.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
so that's kind of strange, or having permission slips, or where they keep it. Like all that soft
Yes.
censorship stuff
Yes.
is really dicey.
Agreed.
And I brought that up, I was asked about that when Boytoy came out, because that happened with Boytoy, where just people weren't buying it and putting it on the shelf because they were afraid of it. And so I talked about that, and I didn't think I said anything horribly controversial. I was just saying this is what happened. And I had some librarians attacking me saying, well, I have a limited budget, and my kid doesn't care about your book, but they want Harry Potter. So are you saying I shouldn't buy Harry Potter just to prove I'm not a censor? And I said, no, that's not what I'm saying at all. I'm not talking about you. Like, if your kid doesn't want to read my book, don't buy it. That's fine. But if you're not buying Kekla's books or Meg's books or my books or anybody's up here's books because you're afraid, then you should think about it.
The Queen.
We can all take a break now.
Buckle in.
The big mouth, right? It's funny because I was a kid, I was always asking questions and getting in a lot of trouble for it, and I was convinced as a child that there was something wrong with me because I didn't understand the world around me, which is why I had to ask all those darn questions. And you should know that I'm a preacher's daughter. So I was raised, and I understand the conservative mindset with a lot of love and deep understanding and incredible frustration sometimes. When they first started to pull my books and call me a pornographer and censor what I'd written, boy, wait till you have to tell your mom that, by the way, that was in a newspaper article. You think I can get pissed off? I took it very personally. I was like, what? You know, it was like I cried a couple of times because it was like people thinking that I wanted to harm children, which is the exact opposite of what we try to do and what all of you guys try to do too. Over the years, I've learned a couple things, though. It's never about me. And I've actually learned how to love the parents who try to censor my books. I don't love the politicians who use those parents' fear for their own political ends and games. They can go to hell. But but what I've learned is that the parents who bring censorship challenges love their kids every bit as much as I love mine, and you love yours, and you love the young people in your lives. But they're terrified because they don't know how to talk to their child or their children about the subject of that particular book. And for people on the right wing of politics, that's often about things that are sexual behavior. For people on the left wing of politics, sometimes it's eating disorders, because I've gotten censored by everybody and everybody in between. So when I see a censorship attempt, what I see is a scared adult who probably didn't have people in their life when they were young to talk to them about things. And it's, you know, when I'm cranky, it's still pretty early in the day. If we were having this in the evening, I would call this failed parenting, because that's exactly what it is. As a parent, your job is to step up and do the hard things and to do your job better than your parents did theirs. And that means having to learn how to talk about things that your child is going to experience in the world. Please God, please all the gods, that no child ever has to go through any of these things, but that's just so completely unrealistic. And even for those kids who are super lucky, and they can get through adolescence in this incredible bubble of privilege and become unscathed, they're the kids who go to college and fall apart because they've never had that experience of building resiliency. That's what these books are for. These books give comfort to the children who are struggling with pain that they don't know how to go to, and it gives knowledge and compassion to the kids who haven't experienced it. Speaking again as a preacher's daughter, I'm going to start swaying up here in a second. Trying to figure out where my amen corner is. Okay, good. Now I'm totally off track. I should never make jokes when I get heated like this. Speaking as what I know, particularly from my faith background, is that in our sacred text of Christianity, Jesus did not tell us don't. Jesus told us stories. In his wisdom, he shared story. And I think every sacred text of any religion that I've ever studied, which is certainly not all of them, you see storytelling, because that is human wisdom at its finest, distilled. And you tell a story, and the listener or the reader takes that story into their soul, applies it to their spirit, and grows from it. That's why these books are so important. So, summarizing, everything they said was right. And I think that if we paid attention, recognizing the place that the censors themselves are coming from, and actually trying to operate out of love and respect for that, because they're hurting. Imagine if you had a 15-year-old child, you know that the world is a very scary place and you don't know how to talk to your kid, or you're so afraid of screwing up, you don't talk to your kid about the super important things you know you should be talking to them about. That's not a fun place to imagine yourself in. So I think there's a lot of room for all of us to learn and grow, and having discussions about these books is a really good place to start.
May I add something? Please.
Oh, yes.
So my daughter read Raina Telgemeyer's Smile when she was about 5 years old. And she wanted to buy a copy of the book for her friend's birthday. Her friend was turning 6. So at the birthday, the birthday kid opened up the book, and she was elated. She'd always wanted this book. And the parent shared a look of, oh, because they had had a discussion about how they weren't going to have Raina's books in their house because of the things they read about how these books were inappropriate. And so I pulled them aside. I said, well, in this particular book, some of the Raina character's friends are really mean to her. And then in another book, there's a character who is gay. So if you think that your kid is going to go through life without these experiences, why not, introduce the thought that your kid is going to have some friends that aren't kind to them, and have, like we're all saying, they have these conversations now through the book. And to sort of piggyback off what Barry was saying too, is I think a lot of the way to broach these conversations is to have these gentle one-on-one conversations, because sometimes when you come out all guns a-blazing, it might not be the most effective way to do it. So I love what you said about trying to see where that librarian is at, and what they need, and how we can best support your community. Let the authors know what you need from us. Like, we're so happy to help, be it a personal letter or a tweet or something that could start a bigger conversation.
I'm going to switch the question to the opposite in a way. In my generation, we were never allowed to talk about issues. I mean, you didn't air your dirty laundry out in public. I mean, that was just, you're not going to talk about it, And these folks write about these issues. And I have been saying for my entire career that books save lives, in a time when it wasn't even politically correct to say that. And to be here at the Library of Congress with a theme of that just is beyond, I'm just so happy that we're talking about it. So to put it out there, I believe books save lives. And I've had conversations with a lot of y'all about how the life-saving power of books. Can you give us specific example of how your books have saved a life that you know about, or what it does? And I want everybody to answer, please.
Well, I mean, for me, I think that all of our work collectively removes the isolation and shame that accompanies traumatic events. And those of you who work with kids who are, victims of trauma, and there's so many ways to think about trauma now. I'm so encouraged by all of the inroads being made on trauma-informed teaching practices and school practices and so on. But there's something comforting about finding, even in fiction, a person who can give voice to those things you're afraid to say, the things you're afraid to admit are happening, the things that you are too painful to utter out loud. And I think that is a sustaining way of building resilience in kids. That's how I think they say. I mean, I don't know. Maybe someone has been on the brink of doing something terrible, reads my book, and decides otherwise. But I think it's a more subtle thing. I think it's an acknowledgement of the complexity of people's lives, and how families are complex, and how you can be in a family and love very deeply a person who also hurts you very deeply, and how that exists. It's human. That is, I think, what saves lives. It removes the shame and the feeling that there's something you're living or something about you that is really impossibly ugly. It's human.
I agree for sure. I mean, I think when I hear the question, has your book saved a life? The story that you sort of want, in a sense, right, is like Barry's story, where somebody says, a child calls and literally says, I was reading your book and that's why I didn't kill myself. I mean, that's sort of the extreme, right, of how a book can save a life. But I'm, as a writer, and also I think as a person, am as interested in the very nuanced ways that something can save a life or that something can change somebody. I have had numerous teenagers say, oh, we had to read this for school. It's the first book I finished all the way to the end. That is I say it and even still gives me chills to think about being the book that somebody finished, to give somebody that experience for the first time, knowing that they came up and told me that when I met them, they're probably going to go find another book and try to get to the end of that one, or at least think it's possible, right? That there are books out there that might intrigue them all the way to the end. That, to me, is a life-changing small thing. I mean, it's huge, right, in its potential ripple effects, but it seems like a small story for somebody to say, this was the first book I finished. But when you're 17, to say this is the first book I finished all the way through, and that's happened more than once with several of my books, And I know that, other writers have had that experience. And, for me, that's a life changed, which some ripple effect down the road could be a life saved.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I only have the one story.
Don't be greedy.
I guess I'm not doing my part. I know. But sort of in keeping with that theme, I think, one of the interesting things, people ask me a lot, why do you write for teenagers? And my answer is I don't. I write about teenagers. I don't really think in terms of who my audience is. I just write the story. But one of the interesting things about the fact that it tends to be predominantly teenagers who read my books is the knowledge that a book can change that person in a fundamental way. Adults are set. We're done. We're set in concrete. Every now and then somebody reads Eat, Pray, Love and changes their life, but that is extraordinarily rare. That's the only one I can think of. That's extraordinarily rare. Whereas you can have 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17-year-old kids who read a book, one book, a single book, and go, oh, now I know how my life goes. Now I get it. And whether it's something as comforting as a gay kid who's afraid to come out reading a David Levithan book and going, oh, wait, it's safe, I can do this. Or whether it's, the girl who read my book and said, I want to help people and growing up to be a therapist. Whatever it is, that I think that's sort of the amazing, humbling, gratifying thing about the fact that teenagers read what I write, is that that's possible. Whereas with stodgy adults, I mean, you can give me the best book in the world, I'm not even going to change my clothes after reading it, So.
That's because you work from home.
This is true. This is true. Odds are I'm probably in my pajamas. So, yeah.
I do hear a lot of stories from adults who will share stories about how my books turn their kids on to reading. These goofy, silly books about farm animals who are in a punk band, or platypuses that are cops, or lunch ladies that fight crime. But I feel what might be more pertinent to your question is that I think a lot of kids might be able to see themselves in my experience, my personal experience. I delivered a TED Talk a few years ago where I was very open and frank, for the first time publicly, about my mother's drug addiction, about being raised by parents who were alcoholics, by not knowing who my father's was, let alone I didn't know his name or what he looked like. And so I visit a lot of schools, and I'll visit schools where the tuition is $30,000 a year for elementary. I'll visit schools where it's 99% free and reduced lunch. And every school I walk into, I am told that there is a kid there, and sometimes I get to meet them on the sly, that is in the exact same position that I was in. And I've been doing a lot of reading up on what the current statistics are. See, when I was a kid, I didn't know other kids had drug addict parents. I was the only one being raised by their grandparents, And today, about 8 million kids in our country have at least one parent that is suffering from an addiction, alcohol or drugs or both. And every time I put myself out there, either with a TED Talk or a feature on NPR or a very honest Facebook post, I get so many private messages, sometimes public messages too, of people who are they're so relieved to know that they weren't alone, that this guy who's writing these books, he has to and had to deal with this as well. And sometimes they're people that I've known for years, and they will then confide this in me. So will that save a life? Perhaps. But certainly it'll make someone feel less alone, and that's always a good thing.
Before Laurie answers, I wanted to, Jarrett and I have become pretty good friends now. We've shared our TED Talks. I also have a TED Talk on the life-saving power of books, because books did indeed save my life. I'm on sabbatical this year. I'm going to be writing my memoir. Well, I probably won't call it my memoir, but it will be titled "I Could Have Been a Serial Killer, but Instead I'm a Professor." Hence the attraction to Barry and his work. But at any rate, I know that the books were a healthy escape option for me. And because I could read books, my vocabulary developed. And because I could read books, I could read lots of books on parenting. So I was able to break the cycle not to complain about my parents, but they didn't have a manual when I was born, but we do have manuals now and books on how to raise kids. And I, as a professor, went to all of them. I have the most wonderful son in the world who I love and adore. And so books do save lives, change lives. And I'm so glad that we're talking about it. And I wanted to finish with saying that when I worked with abused kids, the kids, more than anything, and talking with me, said to be able to see me as a professor and happy. They go, the message is if you've been abused, you're going to become an abuser. And I go, well, that's true, unless you can read and learn what to do differently. I said, but if you can't read and you can't learn other ways of being, you only know what you know. And that's what you believe is normal, and it's not. So anyway.
I was going to say, books save lives, comic books save lives, but also empty sketchbooks save lives.
Yeah.
Because you can either work through your feelings or you can just create an alternative universe for you to live in for a while. So you can either consume that alternative universe or you can create that alternative universe.
Well, I wanted to say this to you, Jarrett, because I remember the day that I watched your TED Talk. And I have always loved your books because they're playful and they make me laugh so that milk snorts out of my nose and things like that.
Thank you.
And that's always good. But it was a very sobering talk, and it was so fulfilling in such a very deep way, and mostly because I felt like your life as a writer now, your happiness, the fact that you have this baby and that you create these joyful spaces for people, that is in and of itself the message. And so kids come up to me all the time who are in the middle of being bullied, who find aggression at school or at home, or they're in violent situations at home, and they want me to tell them what to do or how do I solve this. And the truth is that they can't unsee the trauma. They can't, their life's work is going to be unpacking that and making sense of it. But we can, if we hold on, get through it to the place of happiness. And I think that's what is so powerful about your work and your TED Talk. And that's it. That's the end of my fanning
Thank
for
you,
you.
Meg. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Laurie?
I want to build a little bit on what Kekla was saying, but before I do that, you all have to read how it went down, okay? You just have to read this book. It is a masterpiece of a book. It's a very, very important American story. Beyond that, if anybody here wants to learn how to write or wants to learn how to write better, you need to read that book because it is in itself a master class about writing and point of view, and it's just a genius piece of work. And then I want to build on
Can
what...
she print that on the back of
She's writing it down. It's on tape.
There is video.
Right? but she brought up something that I've experienced a lot too. It's we get these great emails, often written at 3 o'clock in the morning, from kids who say, "Dear Miss, I just finished reading your book. I haven't finished reading a book since 4th grade." Sometimes 3rd grade, and that's just such a great compliment. But it makes me wonder that to me points out a responsibility that this community of people who love America's children and think that literacy is a way to strengthen all of our kids in our country, we're failing them a little bit if our kids aren't getting books in 5th grade that they want to read to the end, and 7th grade that they want to read to the end. And especially for those kids who are dealing with daily traumas, things like that are often characterized as escapist fiction, graphic novels, comic books, God forbid, fantasy, whatever, that gets so judged often by educators. Oh, that's not quite what we want now, is it? Here, young person, read Old Man in the Sea. Please.
Unless you're like an old fisherman.
Well, unless you're an old dead white guy for whom the book was written, right?
yeah.
So
The Gordon Fisherman loves that book.
That's right. So I think that when we use the term save a life, we have to remember that there are indeed some readers whose lives are saved and changed because of what they find in these books. More significantly, though, is that especially a young person who finds those books that start to speak to her or his condition, and they find that that's a safe place to go for whatever their needs are, that is a life saved from despair. Because we all know way too many adults whose bodies are still alive, but their spirit's been gone for decades. They're often living lives or they're doing hard things to themselves and the people around them. So we want to save lives from despair. And that's the function of literature and storytelling. And you always know especially if you're dealing personally with something hard, you have somebody, that character, to sit next to you in your discomfort, to sit next to you in your sorrow. And that just there, that's often enough. So I wish that we all have this responsibility to kind of scratch our heads a little bit and start thinking of books, not as a way to pass the test. I didn't curse, right? Because this is being videotaped, and I know Daddy wouldn't approve. But books are that tool. It's that tool of integrity that our children are so hungry for. And once they know that tool is there and it can be trusted, because we haven't shoved too many books that don't speak to their condition down their throats, we've allowed them the dignity of choosing the books that are speaking to them, right? We're honoring their choices, we're respecting their choices. Then now we start raising a literate generation of Americans who can finally fulfill their destinies.
Thank you. Now it's your turn. This has gone by really quickly, and we're going to give you 20 minutes worth of question and answer time from you. There are 3 microphones there. If you could just kind of line up there behind the microphone that you want to, and I'll acknowledge you, and we'll get through as many questions as we possibly can. So I'm gonna label the microphones 1, 2, and 3. We're going to go with microphone number 1 first. Yes, go. If not, I'll repeat you.
Testing, 1, 2,
Nope.
But I'm loud, so I'll try.
It's probably for the record.
Now try.
Okay.
There, perfect.
Hi. So a little bit earlier, first of all, I just want to say thank you so much. This is like Christmas for a high school librarian. Thank you for this opportunity. So earlier there was a question for Barry Lyga about how does he write about a character who's done something that he's never done. I think it was the killer or the child who shot someone. So and you all do it. How do we reconcile that with issues of cultural appropriation when we're taking a look at authors who are writing about someone from perhaps an underrepresented cultural voice or some other type of experience and they do not belong to that group? So we talk about their humanity. Yeah, they're trying to connect to their humanity, but then there's always that other side. I was just hoping that some of you could speak to that. Thank you.
I worry about that constantly. In the I Hunt Killers series, Jazz's girlfriend, Connie, is African American, and I worried what people would think of me trying to get myself in the head of a 17-year-old black girl. Who knows better than me? In Bang, Sebastian's, the person who becomes his best friend is Anissa, a Muslim girl who has moved to town. I'm not a Muslim. So these are things I worry about. You hope that you approach these with as much empathy as humanly possible. You do your due diligence, you do your work ahead of time, and you have to understand that you're never, number one, you're never going to get it 100% right, but you're never going to get anything 100% right. And number two, and this is the toughest lesson for me at least, because I'm something of a perfectionist and I want people to like me, you're never going to make everybody happy. And I'll give an example. I'll take a moment, give an example. In the I Hunt Killers series, there's a moment where Jazz and Connie are out of town. They're in a hotel room together. They're sleeping. Jazz has a nightmare. He wakes up, and he looks over, and Connie is next to him in bed, and she's wearing a silk sleeping bonnet. I read a review of the book, something I recommend authors not do. But I read a review of the book where this person took me to task for othering Connie. That bringing up that detail was making her alien or exotic. I should say I have no idea of the race or gender of this person who wrote this. I do, however, know the race and gender of two other people who wrote to me about this. I happen to know they were both African-American women who were thrilled with that moment. One, in fact, said when she got to it, she laughed out loud because she was reading in bed and was wearing her silk sleeping bonnet. And was thrilled beyond belief that I had bothered to do the work and recognize that and put it into the book. And it was at that point that I went, so you can't make everybody happy. And if I had taken that moment out, I would have pleased the one person, but these other readers would have lost something. So I think especially, Jarrett and I are the straight white men up here. Especially for those of us who have those privileges, you really have to go into it with a lot of humility and not think, I can do this, which I will admit early in my career was my attitude, was I can do this. And it takes a lot of time for you to realize, you know what, these are people's lives and you really have to think about this. And I don't know the answer. I'm waiting every day for somebody to come down on me for it. I've been lucky so far.
I would say there are two things I think about, because this is a question that is asked, I'm asked this question often, and I have sort of two conflicting answers, right? One is that, we should all be able to write whatever we want, right? It's an exercise in empathy to try to stand in somebody else's shoes and write a story that's about somebody else's experience. We're always writing about something slightly different than ourselves. What lines is it okay to cross and what lines is it not okay to cross? Gender, okay, I can write about boys, but can I write, a Latino boy? All these different, why does it seem harder for us to cross some lines than others? These are all good questions. I think as writers, we should be able to write anything we want. I think we should be able to experiment. We should be able to try to empathize. We should be able to learn. I think that's how we grow. I think that's how we build our craft. I think the tendency when people ask this question, and I don't mean you specifically, but just the question in general, there seems to be an inherent assumption that if you write about a thing, it's going to go out into the world and be published. And that's where the question, the issue comes in, right? It's like, how does this book enter the marketplace? And is it okay for me to talk about this, like, sort of publicly, right? And to me, those are two separate issues, right? What you write about to explore, what you write about to learn, the book that you want, if there's something burning, a burning desire to write about a particular issue that's different from yourself, but what of that writing belongs in the marketplace? And for me, that's a separate question, because we have a situation right now in publishing where it's much, much easier for white middle-class Americans, particularly men, to get published, right? And so what that means is there's an inherent assumption, right? When a white person, let's just be general, when a white person says, oh, can I write across my culture? There's an inherent assumption that book is going to be published and that book is going to go out into the world and that book might be criticized for being out in the world. Like those are all sort of assumptions buried there. And I, as a Black writer, can't make those same assumptions. I can't assume that my book is going to be published. I can't assume that anyone is going to want that story from me, right? And so I think we have to sort of look at all the different layers of what it means to not just write, right? Because you say, oh, if I can't write about anything I want, that's sort of censorship in one way. But the marketplace is sort of already censoring people, right? So when we talk about what's okay to write, I would argue it's okay to write anything. A separate conversation is what needs to be published. What do we need to hear more of? And what we're missing right now is what we're calling own voices, right?
Absolutely.
So people writing about their own experiences, and there's going to be, blurred lines there too, right? I can write a novel about Malcolm X. He's Black, so we have that in common, but it's different because he grew up in the 1940s and he's a man and he became a public figure, all these things, right? So why is that okay and other things are not okay? It's a little bit murky. But that's a story that sort of I got to write, right, because of my experience and because of my sort of study of this history, right, and what you're talking about in terms of research and putting a lot of sort of background and experience into it. But what I worry about is when people who come from a more privileged sort of position in publishing, right, want to sort of tell those stories because they're needed instead of sort of allowing space for other stories. So I think those should be two separate conversations, and they never are. They're always one conversation, because I think the assumption is if you write it, it might be published. And I think that's where we need to sort of unpack that difference.
Sir in the blue shirt. Mike 2.
Hi, my name's Henry Edwards, and I've taught for 28 years. I guess the mic's on, but I want to speak up. Taught for 28 years in the area of progressive schools. Now I'm studying positive psychology at the University of Pennsylvania, so thanks. Hi. So I'm really interested in the intersection between the latest in psychology and literature. And there are a lot of great people out there. Karen Rivich has done a lot of work in resilience and had a lot of success. Someone named Rich Tedeschi, post-traumatic growth. Has anyone heard of post-traumatic growth? These are really important concepts, I think, in literature. And how does kind of the latest in psychology inform your work, especially since you have such a big impact?
I wish I could say to you that I'm up on all of that research. But the fact is that when I'm writing the story, I'm going inside my own questions that I had growing up. I'm going back to feelings I had about unresolved things. I'm making connections between those and what I'm seeing happening with kids now. Like it's not, I'm not reading the psychology on it or teaching practices and creating text. However, in the process of researching the book, any book really, and how would this character resolve this, et cetera. And I could speak to that with Burn Baby Burn. Hector, of course, is a character in this book who's an arsonist, who is a young man who some readers will write and say, oh, that brother, we hate him, he's the bad guy. But I think I tried to draw a young man who has mental illness, whose parents have abdicated their role as his parent, and who's not getting medication or care. That's what that looks like when it is allowed to roll. And so I try to, in any kind of character that I'm drawing, try to draw it with integrity to the psychology, the reality of the person. But I wouldn't say that I study it head on unless I'm really wrestling with a character. For Hector, I did sit down with a psychologist and say, when would Hector detach from his mother? And she said, 3. So if you go back to this book, you'll see that in pages, I'm looking for what happened when Hector was 3.
I think I can answer to some degree. I can answer that question as a teacher, educator. I think what's happening is with reader response theory and these books, that now kids are disclosing more and more than they have ever done historically, and as a society that is ill-equipped to deal with it. And so as a result of that, our schools are in a learning curve right now on how to address these issues. But meanwhile, back at the ranch, one of my doctoral students, for example, used Deadline by Chris Crutcher and did remarkable things with a group of students labeled at risk. And when we call them at risk, we mean at risk for failing school, but mainly because they're being presented with curriculum that doesn't mean a thing to their lives. But you bring in a book like this that's speaking specifically to what's going on, and Deadline in particular has this guy is going to die in a year, and so he lives life fully. And in there's a service project, and he reads just everything he can get his hands on. And these kids who are labeled at risk were modeled their lives after this kid and what they would do and kept journals of it, significantly changed these lives of these kids to the point where, ready for this, all of them graduated from high school, and almost all of them went to college. And these kids, according to predictors, would have dropped out of high school. One book. So it's emerging. We're living through that. So I hope that helps. We're at least having the conversation.
Yeah, thank you. And I love that you're going to a psychologist. That's great, and what's happening. So thank you so much.
Hi there. Hi there, I'm Karen Powers. Myers, and I'm a school counselor, so kind of piggybacking off the theme of mental health and the stigma that we're up against with a lot of these mental health disorders. So I'm just wondering, because all of your books present such deeply complex issues, what opportunities might there be to partner with like the mental health community to help our readers unpack these very complex issues and to process what they're reading and to really delve into the emotions that they're confronted when they read these stories?
In my experience, it works best when, the teachers have a chance to read ahead of time, read the book. Never read one of these books first with your students. I've heard about that happening, and it never ends the way the teacher wants it to end. But to recognize that and it's often that you're always going to have, in a room of 30 kids, we know statistically how many of them have thought about self-harming, how many are struggling with all these different issues, and it's going to feel very raw for kids. So I have heard from many teachers who have partnered with their school guidance counselors, if their school has a guidance counselor, or emotional counselor, and worked with even health teachers to make sure, for example, that there's posters in the bathroom with over the urinal stalls with telephone numbers and websites where people can reach out, and not necessarily to put them in the classroom, right? Because nobody sitting in that class wants their friends to see them writing down that phone number. But there's a lot of different ways a school can be supportive of those kids who are struggling and looking for a place to go. But also important too, I think, for educators to remember is that because you have some kids who are going to be struggling, it's important to sensitize the kids for whom this is all new material. And that's a really important life lesson for them to learn about how do we have conversations about these characters, whether they're making good choices, bad choices, or whatever, in a way that aren't going to make some of those more fragile kids feel judged or shamed. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, thank you.
I've definitely seen it handled really well in some alternative schools and some juvenile facilities and various places that I've visited where they've done like whole discussion groups around like How and Down, for example. And I've had a couple of conversations going in with either the educators or the librarians about how some of the material can be triggering for the students and how they have been dealing with that sort of separately, right, from my presentation. So I'm coming in to talk about the material. And that I've never had a problem sort of in my group, right? But it is the kind of material that can spark somebody to sort of open something, right? And that can go really well, or it can kind of be distressing, right, to a student. And so I've definitely seen some really creative things happening with art, combining art with the reading, where they've done collaging, around like some of their feelings around the book, or pulling out passages that they like, or like collaging around a character, and some different things like that to try to connect the conversation with sort of other ways of processing emotion.
And at the University of South Florida, where I teach teachers how to teach English, we do a statistical survey of the issues affecting teenagers. And then after that, I always go into where do you go for help if something happens and you think that your administration is failing this kid. There becomes a moral issue then on do you let the kid be failed, or do you know who to call for assistance at that point? So thank you for the question. Yes, ma'am.
So my question is about hope. And when you as writers are crafting stories about a traumatic experience, how conscious are you of crafting to or writing to a hopeful ending? Do you feel any obligation, perhaps especially in a middle grade book, to create a hopeful ending or not? Or do you feel that hope is perhaps like the Bible stories you were referring to before, hope is just a part of the human experience, and so the ending will sort of resolve itself in that direction at any rate?
I feel a moral obligation to write towards hope, but I think that's because in adolescence and even in your 20s, you're still pointed towards hope. Bad things can happen, terrible, horrible things can happen to people, but at that age, you're still resilient enough that you can start reaching. And the more you have that experience in hard times of reaching for hope, the deeper ingrained that wonderful habit becomes. So that's where my compass points. I don't know about you guys.
I way. And I also feel like the business of growing up is really about being able to take control and have agency, right, over what's happening to you, over how you're going to respond to the things that happen to you, how you're going to take control. So when I'm ending a book, it's always such a problem, right? But when I'm ending a book, I feel like the ending has to be satisfying. Nothing has to be tied up perfectly, because that's not how problems get solved. Sometimes the solution is just the best of several really lousy options, right? But it has to feel satisfying, and I feel like the character has to move to this place where they can speak, or where you get the sense that they're on the path to the next level of saying, no, this is how it's going to run for me. Do you understand what I mean?
Maybe in the back.
Hi. We're from Digital Harbor High School in Baltimore City. I brought my students. We got the runaround, so our children got the last end of your talk, and because the police kept sending the bus in circles. But we want to know, the students want to know, if you guys do come to the schools to talk to students, they're very interested in your stories and your books. So,
Field
do you make visits?
Field trip.
How many seats do you have open on the bus for the wait?
We have a couple.
Okay.
The good news
You're
is
welcome to come anytime.
The
We'd love
good
to
news-
have you.
Yeah, we all, I mean, I
Thank
think
you.
every single one of us does school visits, and I mean, probably easier, we each have different ways to get in touch, but probably started our websites. Does everybody have
Yeah.
contact info on their websites? Yeah.
What's your name, please?
My name is Olivia Smith. I'm the library media specialist. These are my students.
And yay!
So thank you.
And the good news is that this was recorded, so you'll be able to show this to them.
Excellent.
Thank you.
you so much. And thank you for the privilege of coming to this.
Thank you for
you.
being
So
here.
glad you guys made it. We were worried about you.
Up front.
All right, thank you.
Hi.
Oh, the website is on your program there,
And
and that's
I-
where you go to watch the film.
And it'll be on the YouTube as well, I think, right? The YouTube.
We're going to be YouTube sensations.
The YouTube's the
Yes, ma'am, go ahead.
YouTube.com.
Thank you. So as an author working on a manuscript based in my own childhood trauma, I'm really curious how, from a process point of view, you kind of make it work. You take the trauma and make it work for you in your writing process versus letting it be something scary that kind of keeps your cursor blinking.
For me, I tell myself there's always revision. That's one of the kind of reminders that is helpful to me, that the first thing that comes out doesn't have to be the way that it ultimately is. The first thing that comes out is, nobody ever has to see it. That's your sort of private expression, whether it's the cursor blinking at you or whether it's the notebook open. Sometimes even just going back and typing the previous paragraph, retyping the previous paragraph, so you kind of get back into the flow of it, things like that. Remind yourself what's there. And letting it be okay that it's uncomfortable at times, I think we all kind of write through tears at times, or, get like sort of, I need to step back now and come back later, and all of that is okay, and that it unfolds in your own time, in your own way. And I suspect usually the first draft, when you're writing from your own experience, is more raw and is less polished, and you go back and sort of figure out, what is the story from this that I can pull out, and it becomes a separate thing. So if you recognize that first draft as a protected thing that nobody's ever going to see, that's your own sort of working draft. It's your studio, it's the rehearsal as opposed to the performance, right, in terms of a play. If you can see that as a protected and safe space for yourself to express, I think some more things will come out, and then know that you can mine that for an actual draft later, depending on how far in the process you are now.
Last question of the day.
I wrote my question down so I wouldn't forget what I was going to say. I wanted to go back to something that Kekla mentioned about soft censorship, about this parent who won't buy a book for their kid, or a kid who self-censors when they see a book on a display, but they're not sure they want to take it or not. I wonder, how do you as authors try to reach across that sort of soft censorship line to get books that could help children transform to those children, even though they might not necessarily find or receive those books?
I think in terms of a child or a teenager choosing or not choosing to read a book for themselves, that, in my opinion, is 100% their choice. Kids are really, really good at knowing what they're ready for. And sometimes a kid will go, oh, this sounds really interesting, and then go, yeah, it's not for me. And God bless them for doing that. That's so smart, right? That's self-care, radical self-care right there. So I wouldn't worry at all about that kind of stuff. They get to judge when they're ready for it. In terms of encouraging librarians and teachers to buy the books and put them on, I think these kinds of conversations are really important. Thank you again, everybody, for coming and joining us. You know, this is the follow-up in social media that I hope we'll all be experiencing at the end of this session. And I think social media in itself, the ability to reach out and connect with authors and other readers, and to kind of be strengthened a little bit in your role as a gatekeeper, to recognize that actually your job is to open the gates to both readers and books, not to keep them closed. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, in a lot of cases, in many cases, there's very little we can do as the author. I mean, once it's published, so much of it is out of our control. We were talking at lunch about, we don't even know, for the most part, did somebody in Saskatoon buy my book? I have no idea. Did people in Texas like my book? I don't know. We don't know that. And so I think the best thing we can do is make the best book possible that hopefully gets the reviews and the attention and the word of mouth that will make people say, I wasn't sure about that, but everybody seems to be saying that this is interesting and this is important and this is good. So maybe, I love the way you put it, maybe I'll open the gate instead of closing the gate for this time.
Which I mean, we all are so thankful for the brave educators, because you guys are on the front lines. You guys are the ones that have to have a lot of those difficult conversations face to face with people. And you want to create that space for your kids so that maybe they can connect with something they see in and of themselves, what they're going through in these books. So thank you for doing what you guys do every day.
And that's a nice segue in for me to do a little house cleaning before you thank the authors for their wonderful contributions. I'm just going to ask if you be respectful and allow the authors to leave here and go down there so that they can get set up for their book signing. That way they can go there in an orderly fashion and their books are going to be sold out there for you. But with that said, now, will you please join me in thanking these wonderful authors?
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.